Well, Scott Morrison has come out and said that he finds Albo's reaction to the Chinese extremely disturbing. And of course, Scott Morrison was great in standing up to the Chinese, and that was one of the highlights, actually one of the best things that Scott Morrison did. But James, we've now got the news that Peter Dutton is saying this morning, 35 new fighter jets, billions of dollars to be spent on that, and that's a good time to come out with this announcement. Albanese and the Chinese, weak stuff.
I'm so glad Dutton's buying stealth fighter jets. Albo would probably come out and buy a few new Virgin jets so we could have some Virgin pilots patrolling the borders. I just could not believe the fiasco we had this week, where we are assured by government ministers that, we had the highest level of surveillance.
Yes.
If you are surveilling Chinese warships and you don't notice they're firing live rounds...
You don't notice them, yeah.
and that's the highest level of surveillance. And Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, to say that, well, this wasn't a real threat, therefore our response is irrelevant and does not matter. I mean,
really?
if this... That's what he said. He said it wasn't a real threat. It was so real, 47 jets had to be diverted. I'm pretty sure commercial airliners thought it was a real threat. The other thing that the Defence Minister said is he said it's not a concern that our close allies, New Zealand, who were partnering with us in this surveillance, didn't get the message to us until, 40, 50 minutes later?
After.
And he dismissed that as unimportant. It gives you zero confidence in this government's ability to defend us at all.
Absolutely.
Well, they don't even seem to have the will, let alone do we even have the ability to do this. And I'll be talking about this after the break, but Australia possibly should stop antagonising some of our greatest allies during this period, because just finally on what Albanese said in terms of the Ukraine deal, we're also negotiating an exemption to tariffs against Australian steel, aluminium. Again, I would just advise some caution, because Australia's interests should be at the very top of the Prime Minister's priority list, above everything else, above virtue signalling, about tweeting out something that he thinks is going to be popular. What he's got to be interested about is Australia First strategy. You might want to call it something else, because that sounds a bit like the Trump agenda, but this is what Australians want. We want to have a Prime Minister that prioritises our country and our interests and our living standards and our safety above all else. And I don't think any sort of reasonable person can look at the last 2.5 years and say that.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Virtually everything this government is doing is completely at odds with the future path this nation needs to take, and this nation needs to get on building up our mining, building up our agriculture, building up our investment, attracting money from around the world into a country which should be the greatest place to do business, which should be the greatest place to invest your mining or agricultural dollars in. And instead, we're doing the complete opposite. We're making it as difficult as possible for investment to come here. We're driving it away. This government is so bad, it's got to go. But we've got to make sure that the coalition does a much, much better job of putting, as Rita says, Australia first.
Well, one of the most underreported stories, I think, at the moment, James, is the fact that we are in a recession, a per capita recession. We've been in it for, 7 quarters now? That is something that impacts the living standards of Australians. This is something that hurts everyday Australians, and it seems to be almost forgotten about. We have an influx of migrants coming in who artificially boost the GDP figures, so we'll say, oh, well, we're not really in recession, but the figure that matters is the per capita data, and per capita we are in recession. We have been for some time.
And if Anthony Albanese was hoping that tiny interest rate drop was going to make a scrap of difference to anybody's life, let alone voting intention in the next couple of months, he's kidding himself. The other interesting thing this week was Jim Chalmers was out selling the government's economic message because, according to reports, Labor's insiders weren't confident of the Prime Minister's ability to sell his own economic policies. So this does not bode well for Anthony Albanese. Even if he's lucky enough to win the next election, his own team now just don't believe he's capable of selling their message.
Well, he's not capable of selling any message. I mean, let's be honest.
He couldn't sell The Voice with all the support he had, all the corporate support, all the activists, all that money, and lost, 60-40?